You know, in August of 2025, one of the world's most critical strategic partnerships, it just slammed into a brick wall. The relationship between the US and India, something that's been built up for decades, suddenly plunged into crisis. So the big question is, how on earth did we get here? Let's dig in and unpack this whole thing.
It all kicked off with a single number, 50%. Just let that sink in. A staggering 50% tariff just slapped on Indian goods by the Trump administration. I mean, that's one of the highest tariffs they put on any trading partner. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill trade spat. No, this was a full-blown diplomatic shockwave.
Which just makes you ask, right? How did it come to this? I mean, this just wasn't supposed to happen. You've got two of the world's biggest democracies, both with a huge shared interest in, balancing China's growing power in Asia. It doesn't add up. There has to be something more going on here.
Okay, so every time there's a big political move like this, there's always an official reason, right? The story they put out there for everyone to hear. And in this case, the story was all about one thing, Russian oil. But, and this is a big but, as we're about to see, the official story might not be the whole story, not by a long shot.
The Trump administration was pretty direct about it. They said, look, these tariffs are a penalty. We're punishing India because they keep buying Russian oil. And that money, they argued, is just fueling the war in Ukraine. Seems pretty straightforward, right? At least on the surface.
Well, India's response was, let's just say, not subtle. It was fast and it was blunt. Their Ministry of External Affairs came out and called the tariffs, and I'm quoting here, unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable. Bam! The lines were drawn and a major diplomatic showdown was on.
So India laid out its defense. And it really came down to three key things. First, they said, hey, we've got 1.4 billion people. Getting affordable energy isn't a choice, it's a strategic necessity. Second, they pointed out what they saw as hypocrisy, noting that the US and Europe were also still trading with Russia in other areas. And here's the kicker, the most crucial point. Senior US officials had actually been okay with India buying Russian oil before. You had Treasury Secretary Yellen saying she had no objection, and even the US ambassador to India called it a smaller victory for Washington. So what gives? What changed all of a sudden?
And this is where the official "it's all about oil" story really starts to wobble. While all this political back and forth was happening, a study comes out that actually looks at the hard data. And guess what it found? No real statistical connection between all this geopolitical drama and the price India was paying for crude oil. It's like the economic facts on the ground just didn't line up with the political arguments being made.
Okay, so if the whole oil argument is full of holes, what is really going on here? We've got to peel back another layer and look at the deeper stuff.
And this is where things get really interesting. Most analysts looking at this see two big things bubbling under the surface. First, you've got this massive clash of foreign policy ideas. And second, and maybe even more explosive, you've got a good old-fashioned clash of personalities.
So first, let's talk policy. You really have to get this one concept to understand India's worldview, strategic autonomy. It's been the absolute foundation of their foreign policy for decades. Think of it this way. India refuses to be on just one team. They want to be able to work with everyone, the West, Russia, the BRICS nations, whoever, whenever it makes sense for India. They play all sides to serve their own national interests.
And that's exactly where the friction starts. You have the America First policy on one side, which is all about one-on-one deals and putting American interests above all else. And on the other side, you have India's multi-alignment, this constant juggling act, being friends with the West and the Quad Alliance while also being in the BRICS group with Russia and China. It's like two cars heading toward the same intersection from different directions. They were bound to collide eventually.
But it's not all about these big, grand strategic ideas. A lot of analysts are pointing to something a lot more, well, human. They're suggesting this whole crisis might not just be about policy, but also about personality and maybe even some bruised egos.
Let's just walk through the timeline right before the tariffs hit. So in May 2025, India comes out and very publicly shoots down President Trump's claim that he helped broker a ceasefire with Pakistan. Okay, strike one. Then in June, Prime Minister Modi turns down a dinner invitation from Trump for the G7 summit. Strike two. And then boom, August, the 50% tariffs drop. The timing? It's pretty hard to ignore. And it's not just us connecting the dots. An analysis from Jeffries Group put it out there pretty plainly. They suggested the tariffs were a direct result of Trump's personal dissatisfaction. He was denied a big moment on the world stage to look like a peacemaker, and in this view, the tariffs were the payback.
And look, this wasn't just some personal spat between two leaders that stayed behind closed doors. Oh no, these tariffs sent massive ripples out across the entire global economy.
and started shaking up some really important alliances.
The economic fallout was immediate, and it was real. We're talking up to 70% of everything India sells to the US, its single biggest customer, was suddenly in jeopardy. You know all those American companies that were trying to move their supply chains to friendly countries like India, the whole friendshoring idea? Well, they slammed on the brakes. And back home in India, the government had to start cutting taxes on hundreds of goods just to try and cushion the blow for its own people.
The reaction from around the world was basically a giant chorus of concern. You had key U.S. allies like Australia and Germany saying, "Whoa, we do not support this." And it wasn't just international. Back in the States, you had people on both sides of the aisle freaking out. Democrats were calling it sabotage of a key relationship. And you even had leading Republicans like Nikki Haley calling it a potential major strategic disaster.
But just when you thought things couldn't get more tense, they did. In early September, President Trump basically threw gasoline on the fire. He warned that this whole 50% tariff thing, that was just the start. He said, and I'm quoting, "And I haven't done phase 2 yet or phase 3. I mean, talk about raising the stakes.
And that, of course, sent the speculation machine into overdrive. Everyone started asking the same terrifying question. If 50% tariffs are just phase 1, what in the world does phase 2 look like? Well, the markets and online analysts started gaming it out. Could the US go after India's huge software and IT sector? What about their pharmaceutical industry? Could they even do something like restrict shipping lines or mess with payment systems like Visa? Now, this was all just speculation, of course, but it really showed just how many ways this could escalate and how vulnerable some of India's most important industries really were.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, with the threat of even more tariffs just hanging out there, this whole standoff has turned into a massive test for both countries. And the outcome has huge implications, not just for them, but for the entire world.
When you boil it all down, it's a high-stakes test of wills. For the US, the question is, can our America First doctrine actually work? Can we use this kind of pressure to force a major power to bend to our will? And for India, it's a huge stress test for their entire foreign policy. Can strategic autonomy actually survive this kind of intense pressure from a superpower, or will they have to buckle?
And that really brings us back to that quote from Nikki Haley, because it just nails the stakes perfectly. The argument is that blowing up 25 years of relationship building with the one country that can act as a real counterbalance to China in Asia, well, that's not just a mistake. It's a major strategic disaster. A massive self-inflicted wound. And that's where we have to leave it for now. You've got two incredibly powerful allies, both led by strong, determined leaders with two very different ways of seeing the world that are now on a direct collision course. It is the definition of a high-stakes geopolitical standoff, and it leaves us with one single massive question. Who blinks first?